All right, so I have two articles for you today. One is just a good news article. The other one is a survey that basically puts the lie to the transphobes who are so caught up on detransitioners, convinced that detransitioning must mean that nobody transitions and then doesn't, and then detransitions because logic. But anyway, it turns out that the most common reason is what you would expect if you weren't a transphobe. But anyway, let us start with the good news article. Oregon just passed a law stopping schools from banning books just because LGBTQ plus people wrote them. Because, well, yeah. Seriously, that's your only reasoning? Anyway. So, Oregon's House of Representatives approved a bill this week that would prevent anti-LGBTQ plus book bans in schools, sending it to the state's governor, Tina Kotek, a Democrat, who is expected to sign it into law. As the Oregon Capitol Chronicle reports, Senate Bill 1098 would prevent school and classroom libraries in the state from banning books or other materials based solely on the fact that they include a perspective, study, or story of, or are created by any individual or group against whom discrimination is prohibited under the state's anti-discrimination in education law. That includes books by and about LGBTQ plus people, women, and people of color. And that's a direct shot against Trump and his anti-DEI initiative because obviously, unless you are a cis straight white male, nobody should care about anybody else's perspective on anything. Anyway, the bill does still allow for the removal of books from schools, but lays out specific guidelines for the process. Is one of them reading the damn thing? Parents or guardians of students at a school must make a formal written request challenging a book, and a committee from the school or district must ensure that the challenge was not made based on the book's depiction or authorship by members of a protected class under Oregon's anti-discrimination in education law. That committee must also provide a public written explanation before any book is removed from a school library. SB 1098 also covers school textbooks, which are required to adequately address the roles in and contributions to the economic, political, and social development of Oregon and the United States by men and women of color, people with disabilities, immigrants and refugees, LGBTQ plus people, and other protected classes. The bill, which was approved by the state Senate in March, passed the Oregon House of Representatives Monday in a 34-21 vote. State Representative Cyrus Javadi, the only Republican to vote in favor of the bill, took the floor to speak about how reading helped her own gay son understand his identity. And that's what we've been saying forever. There's nothing wrong with seeing yourself in stories. It is affirming. It makes you feel good. It makes you feel like you're understood, or if something confuses you, it helps clear things up so you understand either a different perspective or you understand your own perspective better. There is so much that different perspectives give us that the fact that so many people are trying to prevent anyone else's perspective but their own being allowed is just so discouraging. It's frightening because even amongst cis straight white men, not everybody sees the world the same way. It is just mind boggling that so many people want just one perspective taught. So I don't know if this person previously had a problem with the LGBT plus community, or and just, you know, got a clue when his own son came out, or her. Wait, her name is Cyrus. Okay, learn something new every day. So, I mean, that's the way it is with most Republicans, that until it affects them, they don't seem to understand other perspectives. But it's entirely possible, since she obviously hasn't disowned her son, that maybe she was always an ally. I mean, it used to be that there wasn't this clear demarcation that Democrats were pro gay rights and Republicans were anti gay rights. That was never the demarcation. There were always Republicans who were either LGBT plus or were pro LGBT plus, because they cared more about the economy more so than sexuality. It was only after Christian nationalists took over the party that this became a thing. So I'm not sure which it is with her. You can remove a book if the content is too graphic, Javadi said, according to the Capitol Chronicle. You can remove it if it's not age appropriate, but you can't remove it just because the author is gay or Muslim or black, or because the story censors someone that makes you uncomfortable. Exactly. You don't want to read the book, you don't want your kids to read that book. Fine. But it's not up to you to tell others. And you can't just tell the library, "Oh, I don't like this book in here because I think being gay is icky." Okay, then don't be gay. Duh. Um Now, as for it isn't age appropriate, I would actually say that shouldn't be challengeable either, because we have school librarians for a reason. They are there because they know what's age appropriate. They read the reviews, which tell them what books are age appropriate. It's not like they're just, you know, playing roulette and it's like, "Oh, this book sounds interesting. I'll pick this one and put it in the children's section." That's not how any of this works. Let's not teach our kids that their stories are too controversial to belong on the shelf, Javadi added. Oregon is the latest state to pass a law aimed at stemming the tide of book bans, largely targeting titles by and about LGBTQ plus people and people of color, that has swept the nation in recent years. While Republican lawmakers in states like Idaho, Missouri, Tennessee, and Arkansas have passed laws aimed at banning books, Colorado, California, Illinois, New Jersey, Vermont, Minnesota, Maryland, and Washington have all passed legislation similar to Oregon's. And what's the difference? Those that pass book bans into law are the red states, and the blue states are the one who think that people should be able to think for themselves. I'm just disappointed that one of the requirements isn't read the damn book. Read the book, give a book report. Because 9 times out of 10, the people who are losing their shit over a book have never read the damn thing, or are really, really trying hard to make a book say or depict something it's not. I was listening to a episode of Strict Scrutiny, which is a legal podcast, and apparently Neil Gorsuch had a problem with Pride Puppy. Now, what was his problem with Pride Puppy? Because it depicted a sex worker. And what was his how did he decide that this person depicted in Pride Puppy was a sex worker? She was wearing a leather jacket. Seriously. What world do you live in that leather jackets equal hooker? That is not how anything works. So yeah. At least he looked at the pictures, which is more than a lot of these schmucks do when they try to ban books. However, if this isn't a picture book, maybe read the words that accompany the book. And also, what freaking world do you live in that a leather jacket denotes sex worker? Actually, I think that he specified BDSM, not just sex worker, but specifically BDSM, which again, what? I'm sorry. High Anxiety depicted BDSM better than that. What the hell, people? According to the Capitol Chronicle, the state saw 151 books challenged last year, more than any year since the Oregon State Library started tracking challenges in 1987. So that is the end of that article. So let us move over to the survey that puts the lie in transphobes screaming that detransitioning somehow means that all trans people are making a mistake because some subset of trans people found out later on that they made a mistake. Because that's how logic works, apparently. Largest ever survey of trans people reveals the real reason trans people detransition. And I want you to pause here and let me know what you think that real reason is. And I'm pretty sure those of you who are either part of the LGBT plus community or are allies or who just aren't fucking morons would probably know the answer to this, but I'm really curious what you guys think is the answer to that question. Why do people really detransition? All right. The U.S. Trans Survey, considered to be the most extensive survey conducted on trans health in America, reaffirms the fact that gender-affirming care saves and improves lives. The survey's findings indicate that individuals who transitioned and then went back to living as their sex assigned mostly gave the same reason: anti-trans discrimination from their friends and family. And this should be a major duh to anyone who pays any attention to this issue, or who are part of the LGBT plus community, or specifically are trans themselves. I mean, this isn't hard. Released by Advocates for Trans Equality, or A4TE, on June 11th, the survey questioned over 84,000 trans, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people aged 18 and older in 2022. Of all respondents, 9% had detransitioned at some point in their lives. The survey also revealed that a trans person's overall mental health and well being depended upon rates of familial support, which is also a profound influence on one's lifetime experiences and suicidality, which again should be a major duh. Imagine that being able to live as your authentic self will improve your mental health and well being and will prevent you from committing suicide. Shocking. How is this? Do we need to be told this? I mean, transphobes need to be told this because they live in some warped reality where they have to pretzel their brains to convince themselves that there's something wrong with transitioning. That somehow it's a mistake because there are some people who changed their minds legitimately. I'm not talking because of anti trans people around them. I'm sure there are some people who were like, oops, because they didn't get the proper care to make sure that they actually are trans. Especially early on, I'm sure that happened. So I'm not going to say it never happens, but the most likely reason is not that. Social and structural explanations dominated the reasons why respondents reported going back to living in their sex assigned at birth at some point, the report reads. Its findings demonstrate that isolation from one's support network can have devastating impacts on one's mental health. Exactly. Yes, it affects you mentally to be forced to live as someone you're not. But if you're live, forced to isolate because your friends don't want to talk to your family, abandons you because they don't approve of who you are, that also takes its toll on mental health. Obviously, humans are social animals. So if they don't get that support to be whom they feel that they really are, if they don't get that support, of course it's going to be isolating and it affects one's mental health. I mean, again, either way, your mental health is being affected. It just depends on which is more acceptable mental health issues. Detransitioning and living as your sex assigned at birth, or by, not having a support group. And everyone has to make that decision. The survey's findings contradict conservative media narratives about transition regret, which suggests that large volumes of trans people detransition because they later regret their transition as a mistake. The survey found that only a small number of people detransition, and the decision is largely due to external factors. Only 4% of people who went back to living in their sex assigned at birth for a while cited that their reason was because they realized that gender transition was not for them. When considering all respondents who had transitioned, this number equates to only 0.36%. Let me repeat, that is 36/100th of a percent. A very, very tiny number. The survey's report stated, on top of that, 98% of respondents said they felt. Let me try that again. On top of that, 98% of respondents said they felt more satisfied with their lives since transitioning. Exactly, because most people who transition are finally able to live their authentic selves. They're able to live life on their terms. They're finally able to live the way they feel is comfortable for them. So, of course, they're going to be more satisfied. That makes perfect sense. The survey also notably the survey is also notably important considering that the Trump administration has made efforts to remove trans people from government websites and data, essentially silencing their voices and robbing researchers of crucial information to help make public policy decisions. This erasure makes it easier for the conservative majority to fabricate claims about trans people's actual lived experiences. Okay. Before I continue with this article, now the government websites we're talking about are things like you might have heard about Stonewall. I mean, let's face it, the people who instigated Stonewall were trans women of color. And they were disappeared from the website. Why? Because I guess only cis white men could possibly have done anything to further a cause. The idea that trans women and of color, I mean, that's 3 no-nos right there. They couldn't possibly have gotten anything accomplished. I mean, come on. And data, well, they've been trying to curb data on how trans people's experiences, how trans people experience things like going to the doctor, and how to properly care for trans people, because obviously their issues are going to be unique than if you're a trans woman, even though you might have some parts that are associated with the female body, it's not the same, obviously. So their issues are going to be slightly different than a woman who is born cis. Same thing with trans men. They're going to experience certain issues that cis men are not going to have to worry about, simply because their biology is different. Even after they transition, certain things are going to affect them because of the transition process. So it makes sense that you need to study trans people to find out how to better give them health care. Let's see. Having real, concrete, and rigorous data about the realities of trans people's day-to-day lives is also a vital part of dispelling all of those assumptions and stereotypes that plague the public discourse about our community, said Olivia Hunt, an A4TE's Director of Federal Policy, during a press briefing this week. The report also touches on trans healthcare between 2015 and 2022. Respondents say that trust between them and their doctors had improved, but the survey also found that racial disparities with trans people of color more likely to experience violence than white trans people. And yeah, that actually checks out. Additionally, mental health challenges still face the trans community in large numbers. 44% of respondents met the criteria for serious psychological distress, compared to less than 4% of the general U.S. population. Well, yeah, that makes sense, because again, you're not going to have a great time if you're surrounded by fucking asshole transphobes. That just makes logical sense. If you're being treated like shit for not being cis, of course it's going to affect you. Many of these issues are likely exacerbated since 2025 when Trump took office for a second presidential term. He has launched attacks against the trans community that has affected healthcare access, increased anti trans policies nationwide, and stirred up transphobic vitriol and harassment. Oh, yes, and I also mentioned that, there's that now trans ban for the military because trans people can have mental health issues, because of course they can, that somehow that must mean that all trans people have mental health issues, so none of them are actually capable of serving in the military, even though they've actually been doing that and been just fine. Over the years, this survey's large amount of data has been released in increments as A4TE wades through its finding. Okay, so that is the end of that article. And, that's good to see, because now, unfortunately, will this survey get in front of the eyes of people who need to hear it? I don't know. I seem to get a lot of Republican eyeballs on this channel. I have no idea how that happened, but I do. So, hopefully, if you're one of those people who don't understand, who insist that detransitioning has something to do with them regretting their decision, I hope you take away two things. Number one, that's not what the vast majority's experiences are. I'm talking about those who detransition. I'm not even talking about trans people in general. But in general, trans people do not experience or have the need to experience detransitioning. That's number one. And of those who detransition, most of them do it because they cannot handle that society hates them for who they are. So they're like, it's easier if I just pretend I'm so and so as opposed to who I'm supposed to be. And yes, there are some people who realize they made an oopsie. Now, I also want to again emphasize that just because there are people who made a mistake, you cannot extrapolate that all trans people are making a mistake. That is not how logic works. Just like everything else, some people will, when they get a medical procedure, some people will have better experiences than others. I'm going to use me as an example. When I'm going to use a really small example. I just had a temporary crown put in, my second one. I'm waiting for the permanent crown to be put in. Now, like I said, I've had this done before. The first time I had it done, temp crown went without a problem. Same thing this time. Temp crown is beautiful. I got the permanent crown, and I swear I had better results with the temp crown than I did with the permanent one. Is that everybody's experience? Not a clue, but I'm going to guess not. Does that mean that everyone should just walk around with a temp crown because one person had a better experience with her temp crown than she did with the permanent? No. That would be absolutely bonkers to suggest that because I had a certain experience, that everyone must have that experience. Not the way life works. Another example. Now, there are people who have a hysterectomy. I had one. Apparently, I came this close to needing a blood transfusion because anyone who knows anything about hysterectomies know that uteruses bleed like a son of a bitch. So, that is always an instance of, the nurses have to find out what your blood type is. Actually, they tell you after the procedure, or at least they told me what my blood type was. I already knew what my blood type was, but they tell you. I came this close, but I'm sure that there have been people who did need a transfusion because the hysterectomy didn't go as smoothly as it did for me. That doesn't mean that I need to ignore people who had complications. That doesn't change the fact that some people do have them. Just because I managed to not have them. I had my gallbladder removed. I swear that my body reacts differently now when I eat certain foods. My body reacts differently now. It could also be that I'm older, but I swear that my body reacts differently. That happens to some people. Does that happen to everybody? No. My father, whose gallbladder tried to kill him last February, he had his gallbladder removed, and to my knowledge, he was just fine. There was absolutely no difference from before the surgery to after, except for the gallbladder not trying to kill him anymore. So, he had a different experience than me. It's not that my experience was closer to reality than his. It's just two different experiences. Same thing with transitioning. Those who decide that they made a mistake, they rectify their mistake. Other people, that doesn't mean that most people are going to then suddenly decide that they made a mistake or that we should go with those people those very small percentage of people who made a mistake and tell everybody that, oh, this is a mistake, so we're not going to transition. We're not going to transition you. Just because somebody somewhere might have a different experience. No, that is literally not how any of this works. That's the same for anything in life. Some people, if you read reviews of certain products or restaurants or whatever, businesses, some people will love the service. Some people will love the product that they bought. Other people will be less than impressed. Now, it could be a different circumstance, like a certain, let's face it, not all tastes are the same. So it could be a matter of they thought that they were going to get this and it just didn't work out for them when it comes to products or restaurants or businesses. When maybe they just didn't mesh with whomever they were talking to because everyone is a different personality. There's so many reasons why some people might have a good experience with something and some people won't. It happens with everything. Why are transphobes so convinced that because some people detransition, and like I said, a small percentage detransition because they realized, oops, and then extrapolate that it must be wrong for everybody? That is the logic I never understood. Even if all the people who detransition did an oops, that does not mean that all people who transition are making a mistake. It's just mind-boggling how they go through, how they manage to get through that. How pretzeled is your brain that makes any sense? But anyway, that is all I have for this video. So with that, I will see you guys in the next one.